actually, some people tell us that women did very well out of the peace process. I think Bethany's contribution belies any notion of that. There is a myth that it was only certain women took part in all of the stuff on the peace process. Well, can I tell you, as a Workers' Party activist, the morning after Canary Wharf, a woman from the Popular Unionist Party rang me and said, we need to do something, and that she didn't know me. She rang me and said, we need to do something about this. We need to meet. And she brought up over a group of women from Shankill Road to meet us in a Workers' Party premises in West Belfast, because actually she believed that women had a role to play and should be playing that role. Every time I talk to that woman now, she laments how women were written out. Somebody talked about them being written out. You know, in reality they were never written in. Women were not written in actually to the peace process. Our issues weren't written in. And I know Patrick Murphy said earlier, we knew what we were against, but we didn't know what we wanted. Well, in the run-up to the peace process, we did know what we wanted. There were a number of us, actually, a number of individuals and parties involved that wanted a working class focus. And we were demanding things like childcare. We wanted an anti-poverty strategy. We wanted our Bill of Rights delivered to us, which would give us rights. And we wanted reproductive rights. We wanted decent housing. And the one thing about the Women's Political Forum, when we met first and even talked about, you know, how there's always differences and tensions, we took a conscious decision that we would rather have an uncomfortable honesty amongst each other than a comfortable dishonesty. So the very first things we started to discuss was policing. We did discuss poverty. We discussed all of the things that we needed. They were sick of their children being used as cattle fodder out on the streets. They wanted a change, and they wanted a real change. Now, they were mostly working class women who came together. And at the end of the day, you can say what you want about what women achieved in the peace process, and it's good that some people were recognised and they put murals up. There's not many working class women on those murals, or indeed there's not many working class women that got anything out of it. And we campaigned together for a yes vote, because actually we had hope, and we hoped maybe class politics would come into it, that we would stop the sectarian sort of battle that always goes on. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And at this moment in time where we stand, sectarianism is as bad as ever was. Orange and green politics is the order of the day. That's the only thing that, I mean, we do. And some of these people who got into Stormont and all of these policies reminded me of a man when I was at an international thing said, I love these people who's willing to go to another country to fight and overthrow the ruling class, but won't do it in their own country. I told him I'd be happy to overthrow the ruling class in my country, but my problem was that actually the violence introduced a new ruling class. There was absolutely no change in any of that. I want to say a wee bit as well about where I come from, because there's a lot of myths actually grow up around things. I come from Tyrone, not far from where Bernadette was, and I lived in a row called Tin Row. They called it Tin Row because it was whitewashed cottages with tin roofs on them, no sculleries, no kitchen, one up and one down. We left that and came to Belfast, and when I was 10, I grew up in a working class area where the Protestant working class and the Catholic working class hadn't got an ass in their trousers or a shoe in their foot. We were all suffering. We were all sold the big con. They were all sold the big con that we're still sold today. Oh, aren't you great? You know, this is happening to us, that is happening. Nothing has been addressed. They were low paid workers. Those of them had jobs maybe in the shipyard and that, and they hadn't actually got big wages. I mean, they were the fodder for the unionists. We now have turned this into that we've got fodder for the British nationalists and we've got fodder for the Irish nationalists, and the working class aren't meant to be doing anything to defend their own rights. The mistakes were made is that we trusted those people we elected. We thought perhaps that they would become class conscious, but I have to say, as a trade union official working the whole way through it, those very people that took over and took the departments, under the new regime, the first Minister of Health was a woman. She increased the number of PFIs. She didn't drive out the private contractors. The Minister for Education, who was a man, was the biggest user of PFIs. Now, PFIs actually took women who were in the schools out of their jobs and they worked for a private contractor. It was big business all the way. So I will be no cheerleader and say that we got anything, that the class I represent and the class I come from got anything out of the peace process other than thank you, well done, now would you mind going back to the house where you come from. And they get very annoyed when we're critical, but we have to be critical. If we don't learn from those mistakes, we are not going to advance the class. And Eamon talked about a fridge, and he's probably right. There was a time actually working class people didn't have a fridge. But what the hell uses a fridge do you now when you've no food to put in it? Or you can't afford to turn it on. You know, you can't afford the electricity bills. So, I mean, while we've moved, we haven't moved. I mean, because those things actually are dead. They're dead issues. Bernadette says, well, you know, that part's over. We move on. But it's not over. For many of us, it's not over. It is not over for the working class people who got nothing out of this. And those who say, but sure, we have peace. You know, the silence of guns, which is not awfully silent, and the absence of bombs doesn't mean we've got a peace process. What you need in a peace process is jobs. We need education, we need a decent health service, we need all of the things that contribute to working class people getting their own, coming into their own and getting the things they so richly deserve. We are constantly being sold across the world as a low-pay economy. And that's how they get them in, yeah. They tell these companies, you'll have no problem with the unions, we'll come over there. We'll see to it, we'll see to it. And you know, it's low paid. Do you know what, I was out canvassing once for the Workers' Party, and a woman told me that worked for Invest AMI that when the higher jobs came in, the higher valued jobs, they had certain contractual discussions and told them they had to have the jobs, you know, they had to be proper contracts. When the lower paid jobs come in, they didn't tell them that there shouldn't be 0-hour contracts. They didn't tell them that people should have a right to join a trade union. They didn't tell them all of the things. The majority of people in Northern Ireland, and we are the majority, the working class are the majority. This whole discussion about minorities and majorities, if we look at it, the working class are the majority. It is absolutely time we banded together and started operating and voting for people who believe in class politics, because I tell you, that shower that we've got in now, I mean, they talk about taking financial responsibility. What they mean is they're going to be fiscally conservative. Let's be honest, we had an assembly when they introduced a pay freeze before the Tories did. Nobody likes you mentioning that, but they did. They introduced a pay freeze before the Tories did. They would not properly fund the health service. They wouldn't properly fund the education service. There was actually a disgraceful carry-on. And they tended to work the things out about rights, and one for you and one for me. And they operated on a particular pro forma that one for you and one for you. You know, nothing about we need, it was like that in housing, and it still is in housing. When you look actually at the housing need, and we've fallen into the jargon, we talk about social housing. What's wrong with talking about public housing? That's what we should be talking about. We are adopting actually their language. They talk about that. In Belfast, not far from where I live, there was actually there is a housing shortage, a real housing shortage in one of the areas, and one of the areas was the New Lodge. What did they do? They actually built some houses there, and they built houses on the Old Park Road at the bottom of it, which had already been built and knocked down because nobody would live in them. Nobody wanted them. There was not that objective need. Now, unless we change that, and we change it in a big way, we are doomed to do the mistakes of the past. And that brings me on then to United Ireland and women in this new Ireland. If women fare the same as they did under the peace process and the new actually era that we were having in Northern Ireland, look out, girls, because I mean we aren't going anywhere fast. And it's the same conservative forces. I mean, look at the players. Look at the players and take this away from, you know, this the dream that we're getting there. You know, the dream that we leave one imperialist force so we can get into Europe and join the other bigger imperialist force is a falsehood, and it's absolutely ridiculous. There is nothing for ordinary working people in that. And the players will do that. They will say they will introduce the same policies as they've introduced in Northern Ireland. And to be honest, Eamon mentioned actually, and I think Bernadette mentioned the environment. I like actually what the Workers' Party President Ted Tynan said at a demo on the environment. If you want green, vote red. And I'm going to finish on this because I'm going to say the only way that we will get, and the working class people and women will get the rights that's due to them, is then we have a socialist government. You cannot reform capitalism. You cannot tinker around the edges. They're not doing that. And it's, you know, sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. We don't actually say that, we say, you know, the war is between us and men. The war is between the working class and capitalism, to be perfectly honest. But sadly, our politicians give us culture wars to fight.